Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives. This is Jess, and I'm so happy to be sitting here across from Bruce Bozzi on this beautiful rainy day. I'm in the city. You're in East Hampton, you just told me.
Yes, I am. Hi, this is great. Thank you.
Of course. I'm so happy to see you and talk to you. I feel like I know you. So I guess, how's your summer been going so far? Like, how long are you going to be in New York in general?
Sure. My daughter Ava and my husband Bryan and I, we came to New York a week ago for July 4th week. And we flew with my stepdaughter Billie and her fiance Austin, and they were here for the week. They went back to LA, and it's sort of tradition, Jessica, that like I bring Ava back to New York and to East Hampton. I mean, for me, I grew up in New York and being always coming out here. And for Ava to have time with her grandparents and my sister and her cousins, it wouldn't be summer. And the summer was a little, I was concerned because what was going to happen if we couldn't get back. But we've managed to get back, and we're here it's a short, abbreviated for us, July 26th, and then we'll go back.
Do you still have a place in East Hampton?
We do. I grew up. So my parents' home is out here. Sort of they live in Florida, between Florida and East Hampton. So I just stay at their house, and we have a guest house that Bryan and I stay in. And, it's one of those things, Jessica, we are obsessed with real estate, and we'll look and look and look. But until we're really back on the East Coast full time, which is an aspiration of mine, then maybe we'll try to have two homes. But right now it's LA and New York City.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. So how most people know you is twofold. Number one, you were the executive vice president of the Palm restaurants across, was it nationwide?
It was nationwide. At one point, it was international with two franchises in Mexico, and we opened in London, which didn't work well for us, but we tried. It was very difficult doing business across the Atlantic. But at one point, there were 31 locations. Starting really just from one restaurant on 2nd Avenue in Manhattan that my great-grandfather and his partner started in 1926, and unfortunately wrapped up this year in 2020. So it's no longer in our families, but it was an incredible 30-year career for me and for our families.
I guess, how did it feel? Did you if I put myself in your shoes, part of this family business, you were fourth generation. Are you, or were you, in the middle, at the midst of a little bit of an identity crisis as far as what to do, what's going to be the next chapter? Have you begun to think about that?
Sure. Yeah, I have. One of the things I always ask myself is, how is this going to end? How does this story conclude? It's 94 years, assuming that one day we would sell the business, my family would make money, the other family would make money, and yet again, sort of the danger in family businesses, and it's a story told many times, is, it can get ugly. And this got ugly between really based from the other family, but there were a number of things that came into play. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? What do I want to do? And I had been thinking about it for a while, and I was able to reinvent the Palm about 10 or 12 years ago with a refresh of the brand. And it was wonderful. And I became sort of the face of the company and really told the story that, this is a family business, and family businesses don't really exist much in America anymore. They, get bought up or they go away, and this was cool. So I thought, as this sort of unfolded, and I think I'm still, Jessica, in the early stages of the 7 stages of, so grief and the whole thing. So it's been a process. It was a rough 2 years, and the last couple months certainly were really, really rough. Coincidentally, Andy Cohen came to me about in 2016 and said, this is a show, Lunch with Bruce, similar to what you're doing with just conversations. And so I've been doing that and have roughly done about 80 of them. And that now continues with Quarantine with Bruce. So I don't know. I hope to figure it out. Right now I just say I'm unemployed. Who knows?
So I want to kind of get your backstory. You were born in New York City?
I was born in New York City. My parents are third generation New Yorkers. I was born in Queens. We lived in Jackson Heights. roughly till I was around 9 years old. And then we moved into Manhattan. And I went to elementary school in Manhattan. I went to high school. I went to Riverdale Country School. Then I had always dreamed about Los Angeles and California. I grew up really primarily with influenced by television in the 70s. So a lot of like Eight Is Enough, a lot of Three's Company, a lot of Charlie's Angels. And my dream was to get out there. The 80s came. I went out in 84 to USC, thought I was in heaven. 84 to 88, came back to New York, was a page at NBC for a year,
Can we talk about that? I want to hear your stories from being a page. So were you working for like Letterman or SNL?
Yep. So basically, that program was amazing. Very hard to get into. You had a number of interviews, and when you got in, you got in. So your primary responsibility day to day, you had the outfit, and you gave tours. You gave tours of NBC, and it was, exhilarating. You had like tours roughly between like 15 and 17 people. It was 1989, so pre-security, pre all the crazy things. And then the extra parts of your day were like when you had to do audience services. So my main gig was, Saturday I'd give tours all day, and then we would go have a break and we'd work Saturday Night Live. And it was the year, for those of you listening, that Saturday Night Live celebrated its 15th anniversary. So that was the 15th year. And it was the year Gilda Radner died, and we were there. And
oh, wow. So wait, so the year that you were working there, do you remember the cast?
Yeah. Oh, I should. Dennis Miller, because he used to make fun of my hair. Because I had all this big, 80s hair. Yeah. Dennis Miller. Okay, who was on it?
Was it Kevin Nealon?
Yes, Kevin Nealon. What's his face who died, whose wife killed him?
Oh,
remember him?
Philip Hartman.
Yep, Philip Hartman. The blonde ditzy one, Victoria Jackson. And it was unlike anything. So my job with this other girl, I'm not a girl, was at it was called the 8th floor. And so the 8th floor was coveted because you had the list to get through. And we would be like, no, you're not on our list. Sorry. And people with the power you wielded. So I did that. Letterman was on the 6th floor, right across from local news, Live at 5 with Sue Simmons. So hello, crazy. And I often got the job where you stood between the audience and Letterman's desk. And it was kind of crazy. Robert Morton was the EP, and it was, I'll tell you two stories, like one big story. So like, and it was the coolest job because you just were like there. Betty Davis was on. It was 1989. She was really old. She was going to be honored at Lincoln Center. Across the hall was Audrey Hepburn as a guest on Live at 5. I basically was because I also had the Today Show assignment that summer. So I was getting to work at 6 a.m. So she knew me from the morning, and she was really into me because her sister was like, she really likes guys. And I was like, okay. So I was like Betty Davis's guy. Then live, and then she's like, and I'm standing, no joke. And this was the beauty of the program because you were a fly in the wall and the most intense, like Brandon Tartikoff was running it. It was really a special moment. And I was standing between Audrey Hepburn and Betty Davis having a conversation and me. And you're just like, wow. So that job to me, to this day at 54, was the best job I've ever had.
Did you ever have any interaction with Letterman?
I did, but not a lot. You were very, at the time, you were given a couple of instructions. Don't look him in the eye when he walked by. He did not want eye contact, and just to be really sort of like cool and laid back around it. Like he was the king of the castle there, and you knew just, okay, you did not want to get in the way of that.
Letterman was everything. Like even when I was a kid, when I started watching him, I think he had just left his NBC show and he had jumped over to CBS. But so I followed him through that whole transition, and Letterman was everything.
Oh, everything. He was so quick, so smart, so great. I remember that. I remember watching that first show on CBS when they transitioned over because he thought he was going to get Carson's spot. They gave it to Jay Leno, and he was just like, okay, I got to go, and they gave him this big deal. But so it was like, I did Donahue. because he was shooting on the 8th floor, so I would do Donahue, I would do Letterman. I did the Today Show assignment, which nobody wanted because it was early in the morning, and I did it during the summer. So by the time I finished that assignment, which was they were 8-week assignments, everybody that I was in the program with was interviewing to be a part of it, because I would come up with these stories of like, oh, I got stuck in an elevator with Winona Ryder, or I was wheeling Shelley Winters around and crashed into like the wall because she couldn't walk, and she, to get her to makeup. Or I had a million funny stories. And at the very end of that, and I think this was really the lesson that I learned, I was really in charge of the green room. And as you know, the green room is like everyone they come, they check in, you have to make sure they get the makeup, you make sure they have stuff to eat, you make the coffee, you have the pastries, the senior producers in there typing scripts, because scripts are changing left and right as news comes in and you're running it in. And the very last day, Jane Pauley is sitting at the desk and she's applying her lipstick and she's just getting ready to go on air. And she goes, so I hear today's your last day on the Today Show. And I said, yeah. I go, it's been great. And she's like, would you like me to write you a recommendation? And I looked at her and I said, well, yes, of course. But, all I really did was get people coffee and make sure they were in the studio on time. And she said, and this is a lesson to all of you young people, it's not what you did, it's how you did it, Bruce. And you came to work every day with a great attitude. I never said, hi, Jane. I always said, hi, Miss Pauley, Mr. Gumble. I just knew. And I said, and I still have it like in a frame. And it was truly great. And then you
should post that online.
I should post that. You know what? You're right. That would be a good thing to share with people. Yeah. And then I moved to LA. Then I was like, you know what? I want to get back to LA. I thought that was like the motherland for me. And I went back out there and I was there about 4 years. It was really great, but it was really about me becoming comfortable with my sexuality, making friends who were gay. I didn't have gay friends. I needed to get away from my city and my home. And after 4 years, and it was a wonderful 4 years, and it was when 4 years felt like 4 years as opposed to 2 months, because, you're young. Mm-hmm. And then I moved back to New York, never thinking I'd move back to LA. And of course,
wow,
you never know. You never know what happens.
So when I said like you're really well known for two things. Number one, obviously the legacy of the Palm. And number two, you are most famously Andy Cohen's best friend. I mean, never has there been a best friend. I guess like Oprah and Gail. Like she
oh my God, that's great.
He has like he really has like elevated you. I mean, Jesus Christ, your own radio show. Like he really like gave you a nice platform to sort of expose your talents.
He would, you know what? First of all, I love the comparison because I love them both, Gail and Oprah. But he did, and and it was Andy and I. We met. Well, I moved back from LA, and I was dating this guy who happened to be Andy's best friend, and it was 1994, and I met Andy, and over the next 3 years of this relationship. Not only was Andy a pain in the ass because he was a shit stirrer in this relationship, but every time I knew we saw Andy, this guy and I were going to get into a fight because Andy would be like, "Oh, do you know so and so?" And it would be someone I dated 4 years before, and I was would always get me in trouble. And from that birthed this incredible friendship. And Andy's rise and, always a hard worker. I mean, none of us saw that coming. And when Andy started to do Watch What Happens Live in a little nook of NBC, Bravo, and then he did. He basically, it was astounding to me when people would be like, "Hey, you're Andy's best friend. You're Andy, Andy Cohen." I was like, wow, people really noticed. And then he did give me this platform for the radio show. And he was always a big supporter with me in the Palm. I mean, he was a senior producer at CBS, and we do cooking segments, or he really helped me.
When he was a producer at CBS, was that his job when you first met him, producer at CBS?
He was a producer at CBS on the early show, and on the early show, basically.
And you would do cooking segments?
He then got like Mark McEwen,
Amazing.
Who was like their host, and he would book me, and he started to get the Palm some play on that part. And then when he transitioned into being an executive and on-air talent, and with the show and the bartending, and it's been kind of great. I mean, I love it. Sometimes I get a little it's freaked out by it, but it's awesome. And the radio show has afforded me this, like, and I think, and I don't know how you feel about it, I love talking to people and I love meeting people. So combining with what for the Palm and for me, and then as the Palm started to shift and I said, well, this isn't going to go, I kind of said, let's really kind of brand it more Lunch with Bruce and have some fun.
One of the funniest things I saw online was, well, so the precursor to Andy getting his one night a week doing Watch What Happens Live was he used to write this blog for BravoTV.com.
Yes. My God.
Where he would basically keep a diary. It was not only was it the precursor for Watch What Happens Live, it was the precursor to his diaries. And he basically used to like do like a recap of all the shenanigans that he would get up to and all the people in his life. And you were a very heavy figure in that. So much like Bruce was like a full-blown character. You can still find these blog posts on BravoTV.com. And so much so that I guess the webmaster at the time, I think, was like, we need to flesh this out more. And there is literally a post that says, who the hell is Bruce? And it's like a showcase on you.
It really is. It was very funny. And now that you say that, and I completely forgot that Andy would like write about his cab ride up to 30 Rock. And like, if the cab driver was rude and like, or if the cab was smelly and like all these like crazy things. And when I saw that, who the hell is Bruce? I thought, of course, it's a very valid question. Who the hell is Bruce Bozzi, and like, how is he in the zeitgeist of this? But
so funny. So you guys, I guess like, paint me a picture of like you and Andy in the day. Like, where were you guys living in the city? Like, where were your apartments? Was he like in the West Village at that point, or someplace else?
Yeah, Andy was always the king of the West Village. He moved there. He lived way back when on Washington Place, like right around where Florent used to be, off of Gainsbourg, that whole area, right? So this was a rental building that they were going on sale, and he said to his mother, and it was and Andy has an annual Christmas party from like that point when he was 25 to now when he's 52. Like, it's just part of his thing. And so we'd all smush in, and the apartment went up for sale for $175,000. And his mother was like, are you crazy? That much money? That's ridiculous.
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? Yeah. Like, right? We're like, great. So he always loved, that was like his hood. And then I was living on 21st Street between 9th and 10th Avenue before 10th Avenue was anything. It was the late 90s. It was dark over there, yet again. Who knew? If I had, some shekels, I could have bought something there. So we were close, and we were all like kind of running around there. And then when my relationship ended, Andy and I kind of coined. It was 1997, and we were like two peas in a pod. Like, we just went to Miami. These guys coined us Brandy, Bruce and Andy. We were like, oh my God, how did we never think about Brandy? And we just really went full stream ahead.
Why didn't you guys ever date, or did you?
We didn't date. I mean, one of the things I think, and people often ask that, and they just were so connected. There was a moment where I think, not only was I in the relationship first, but then when it transitioned into like a very, very close friendship, there was, I cannot not say there was not a lot of chemistry. And because I think even in any sort of friendship, there's so much chemistry. And I think we just were a little bit potentially fearful that dating would impede the friendship that had become so great and profound. And I don't think we were really ready in a way. I think that, Andy was we were both kind of figuring out who we were. Hindsight's 2020, who knows? But I love him. He's part of me. So I think it just was one of those things that didn't happen. But life, I'm married. So, my husband always says, that's your husband, Andy. And he's right. He often will say, when I die, I know what's going to happen. You and Andy will be together and you'll be married. And we laugh.
So where did you guys used to go out? Like, what restaurants? Like, in the day, like, I guess this was, so the late 90s, like, where were you going out? Like, who were you seeing? Like, I know he has that story about like seeing Warhol. Yeah. Like, what were like the highlights of the 90s?
Well, what happened was, so in the 90s, in the early 90s, I was in LA and I didn't know Andy, right? And I called them my my Norma Jean years that transitioning into Maryland. So in those years, I became friendly with Barry Diller and David Geffen and Liza Persky and Sandy Gowan, like all these people, and was running around. And when I went back east, those friendships continued. So when we kind of hooked in, we were, every Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, we were at Florent having brunch, or we were at G if we were going out, or we were at the Roxy if we wanted to go dancing, or we were at a house party, or we were out because we rented that house in Sag Harbor. We rented a couple years together, and then he kind of continued it on, so he has it.
I'm so glad you brought this up about the house in Sag Harbor, because I was actually going to ask you about this, because I had this suspicion, clearly, like, I had heard this somewhere along the way, like very faintly, that the two of you guys actually rented it back in the 90s, and that is still the house that he's in to this day. And does he now own it, or does he rent it?
No. So the house, we found the house, it's called, and Hagenach, we call it, and we rented it as a group, like a group rental for summer of 94, summer of 95, summer of 96, right? Summer of 97, relationship's over. He's still in it. There's a couple people. Then he's getting successful enough that he can actually afford. It's not very expensive. There's a family that owns it. They're based in Pennsylvania. Lovely couple. It's been in their family for generations. He asked. He was like, over the years, he's like, can I please just buy it? And they just were like, we don't want to sell it. So he never, it was a perfect house. It's a perfect house for him. It's right on the water, like on the sound, and it's quiet, and he loves it. But now he has a son, and they're in it this summer, but he's soon outgrowing that house. And a beautiful, I was over there the other night when we were having dinner. He cooked me dinner, and he was like, we were looking around, and we were like, we had a lot of summers here. We had a lot of good times in this place. So it served way beyond its, purpose.
How has, I'm curious, because I spend a lot of times in the Hamptons as well as, I live full time in New York City, but my summers, for the past decade I've spent, I'm from Long Island, and now that I'm like an adult, I really do love the Hamptons, as you do. And so I guess tell me how the Hamptons itself has changed since the 90s.
I'll tell you. Well, okay, so we started coming out as a family in the 70s. And then in the 80s, when I was like a teenager and I was in college, that's when I really hit clubs that are long gone. You know what I mean? That were in Sag Harbor. There was a big one in Sag Harbor.
Barn. That's the one that I was just thinking of, the Bawdy Barn.
Is that where Lizzie Grubman got into that accident?
It's possibly.
So then in the 80s was that sort of time, and it was the 80s. So there was a lot of, I was working at the Palm at the Hunting Inn, and it was filled with models and Christy Brinkley and Billy Joel, and, it was Kathleen Turner. It was really just a great time. The 90s, transition into the 90s, different feel. Now I'm in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. And, we're now a group of guys, and we're hanging out. And, there was, for us, clubs like the Swamp, that was still a gay club out here. That was amazing. It's where we learned Princess Diana died. We were very upset that night. Andy and I, we were having dinner in Sag Harbor at what's that diner that used to be there? You might remember it. I think what's really changed is wealth seems to have just gotten out of control out here. So you have this, a phrase that I hate, which is sort of like the top 1%, the percent of the percent. I feel like money has become a big thing, and I think that it's more crowded. It's always was crowded, but it's really crowded. People got, to me, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world is the eastern end of Long Island, and the beaches. And if you could find your nook and have your great house and your friends. So I think what's really changed is we grew up a little bit, and, more like socializing with people at their homes and lunches and stuff like that. And Andy, who is the most social, driving around, visiting friends, he's really great about that. But, less driving and, the drinking, driving, we got serious about things, but it's still fantastic. Like tonight I'll pick up Sam's Pizza and I'll go to his house and we'll eat.
I love it. You mentioned your husband. So you're married to Bryan Lourd, who
yes.
Is he ostensibly the head of CIA?
Yes, he and his two partners, Kevin Uvain and Richard Lovett, are certainly the three partners, and they run Creative Artist Agency now and sort of do everything. And yes, are in charge of that company.
And is he Madonna's agent?
Well, Madonna's a client, and Madonna, I mean, he knows Madonna for many, 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 many years, right? So he knows Madonna from way back, and I wouldn't say, no, this woman named Maha, who is a great agent at CAA, that's her day-to-day, agent and her person. But, so like Bryan's clients, because, though he's the partner, so he runs the business, his clients would be people like George Clooney and Daniel Craig and Scarlett Johansson. And those are, Bryan is an avid, you have to read if you really want to be a good agent. You must read. And so he's involved, of course, in every aspect of, he's a big deal.
I want to hear, so the reason why I bring up Madonna is because I am a super fan like you are. And I want to hear how it's, from what I can tell, she's in love with you. And I want to hear, I mean, I've seen these pictures of like your arm is around her waist, and I've seen the you and Andy partying in Paris. Like, I guess like you had gone to see her show. I mean, I guess, how did you, like, do you have your first memories of like getting into her and like this was the one?
Yeah, I do. So you go back, okay, so it's early 90s. I'm living in LA. It's a whole different vibe in LA in the early 90s, and it's a great vibe. It's like New York was a little bit, it was in a recession. It was a darker time in New York, and a lot of people were out there. And I kind of danced around a group of people. I was friends with Ingrid Casares, so of course that's like 1 degree away from Madonna. Herbert's, and there was always like August birthday parties. I'd see her at Club Louis, which was a big club with Sandra Bernhard, but there was no interaction. It was more like I'm starstruck. Then you kind of fast forward, and the first time before I was with Bryan, Stephen Klein, I got to know Stephen Klein, and he was like, do you want to come out? And I'm going out with a group of friends. Do you want to come out? And I go, yeah, great. Well, he was going out. It was a party for the album that Madonna was releasing, which I'm going to forget the name, but I think it's maybe one of her best. It was just like at that perfect moment. She had just turned 50. Jump.
Confessions.
Confessions, right. So we were there, and all of a sudden I'm in this like small club in New York, and we're dancing. Like, we are dancing. She's dancing. All her people are dancing. Cut to. Then I'm with Bryan, and like now she starts to feel, and I'm just a fan, and she knows it and she loves it. So like, for instance, we have always a big party at our house, and she was all dressed up, and you've seen some pictures of me that I posted, and I literally had her coat. I held her coat the whole night, and she just like got the biggest kick. And when she was leaving, she was like, she took her coat. She's like, I'll be right back. And she gives me a big wink like this, like, saying adios. We connected because I went to Milan to see her with Bryan. Paris, we went with, it was Andy, it was Mark Consuelos and Kelly Ripa, it was Anderson and Benjamin, and we all went. We had a great time. We have a connection. We've made out. We've literally made out. I was not expecting it.
Where did you make out?
We made out the Vanity Fair party. 1 year, we were all like talking, and I said, hi, Madonna, and she was like, hi, and I like just reached out to hold her hand. She was like, you're just going to hold my hand? And I go, no, of course not. And I go in for a kiss, full tongue. I'm like, oh my God. And then we went in again. And Bryan happens to always kind of just miss it because he's looking the other way, and he'd be so furious. And then he finds out, and he's just like, I can't take you anywhere without you getting into some sort of trouble. So Madonna, I adore, and like you, and I got to say about Madonna, and I just want to say it with you. In the early 90s, if you were gay, what Madonna did for the LGBTQ community at a time where we were still struggling with a lot of fear with AIDS. There was no cocktail that really came to light in 1996. Her videos were quite, she really pushed the limit. Of course, she was just like, gay men especially love that, that woman, the changing of the look and the whole the thing that we get into. And she just, it was insistent and on pushing people to the limits. And when Truth or Dare came out and Alec Kashishian did that documentary, it was like life altering. And I always say she did so much, and she gets a lot of shit now. She's a little bit of a gazunta. She's wearing the braids. We don't know what's exactly going on with the face, but we love her, and she's getting a little nutty on Instagram, but she's always number one.
Like, don't you? Okay, this is how I feel. Don't you agree? I mean, I don't want to put the words in your mouth. Don't you agree? But like, the way I feel is Madonna and Cher. I don't believe Cher is on Instagram. She's definitely on Twitter. I don't know that Cher is on Instagram, but I feel like a Madonna, a Cher, I mean, the rest of them like are sort of no longer with us, but like these type of legends should not be accessible on Instagram. Like, they are legends because like Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Cher, all of these people, Prince, it's George Michael in the day. It was the mystery and the enigma.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're like, do we really need to see a selfie in the bathroom? Like, it kills it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on a point that's really interesting in regard to, for not only for them, but really for many of us in the world. I think that you're right. Part of the allure of being a celebrity, part of the allure of being a sex symbol, part of the allure of everything is less is more. And so in a time before social media and specifically Instagram, but the paparazzi were crazy. They'd catch celebrities like looking, not great and stuff like that. So we went into that mode. But they were still iconic. I agree. Now, I don't think Cher's on Instagram either. I think George Michael, unfortunately, he left us too soon. Whitney Houston, she fell off a cliff. I think Madonna specifically, and I always say this, it's unfortunate, and I can't begin to sort of analyze it because I don't think you and I can have any inkling of what it's like to be that person who becomes that famous for so long, and what's the transition when you're on the other side of that. And, from my perspective, I go, if you had kept, did less work to your face, kept your body sort of lean and mean, and like had this Greta Garbo-esque, transition into your career, wow, but, I guess a pop icon kind of wants to hold on to that. But I do think less is more, and it does diminish them as they get older. But what it also does is to the next generation, my nephews who are like, you have Billie Eilish now, who's very different, but Lady Gaga, who's absolutely amazing. You know what I mean? And Gaga, I think, will go into being the pop star, into more of the sort of like standard Billie Holiday, Dinah Washington-esque sort of like really Greta Garbo like thing. But yeah, I think, and specifically with Madonna, with no disrespect, and not, you can't take away, all of us from whatever we've done, your achievements are your achievements. I don't think she's doing herself any favors posting herself in a tub or like holding her breasts, because first of all, it doesn't really look real and looks weird, and she looks a little kooky, and it's, I don't particularly enjoy that piece. Yeah.
Same.
I didn't follow her for a while. Like, I stopped because I was like, I had to like stop because like I couldn't get and I went back, but I needed a break because of the I was getting freaked out a little bit. But all she has to do is, and she's done it recently, is I didn't really the Madame X tour was, I thought, a little kooky.
You didn't like it?
I liked it. You know what? I don't know if I liked it so much because I feel that I think that yet again she presents herself in a way that I think it's somewhat, it's so stupid, it's ageist, and it's not meant to be. But it's like you're doing cartwheels around a stage, and it just, I don't know. I don't like the mask. I don't like the fishnets with the things and the. It's me. You know what? I got the
eye patch. You don't like you don't like the eye patch.
Yeah, I don't like the eye patch. So I did give the money to do that. Remember that little stint?
The Polaroid?
I got the Polaroid and I framed it.
Amazing. See, you will you will partake to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, you know, even though we've recorded, it's my voice. I'm going to say it wasn't me. Somehow you asked somebody else to do this interview. Just kidding.
It's so
Madonna, I love you, Madonna.
Curious to know, like, how long have you been with Bryan, and how did you guys meet?
We met. We're going on 14 years. We're married roughly, I think, going on 5. We met years before we had a mutual friend. Barry Diller was a very good friend of both of ours. I was sort of the East Coast version. Once I moved east, then he was the West Coast. And just over time, the groups of friends kept sort of, you know, coming together. And then there was always I always had a lot of feelings towards Bryan, as did I think many people. And we just, you could feel the chemistry with somebody. And then I had decided when I was turning 40 to become a father. And I met with a friend of mine, and she said, there's an agency called Growing Generations. You can do this. So I started the process. Bryan and I started to date. Like I ran into Bryan and I just said, look, this is the deal. You know, this is how I feel. And he said, this is how I feel. So, and Billy at the time was 13, and the rest is sort of history.
So, okay, so there's 2 things here. I guess first of all, I want to hear about your decision to become a father. Because initially, were you with Bryan or no? Like you had Ava as a single father.
Initially, the decision, the commitment, the signing of the contracts, the sort of, you know, picking the egg donor, picking the surrogate, the meetings, the facilitated meetings, I did solo. I was not 100%. Bryan and I were not a couple. Then very quickly we became a couple, just because that's how the time. So before anything sort of medically was done, we were a couple. So as far as we're both concerned, you know, she wasn't conceived yet, and we were together as a family, and then she was conceived, and we had roughly 10 months as just a couple without a child, but with a teenager, because I was, you know, coming back and forth. I was still based in New York, and once the baby was born, I relocated to LA, and because we had a teenager and a baby, and so but I was never a really single father. Bryan and I were together.
I think, you know, when Andy announced that he was going to be a dad, I think that was a huge cultural shift. He really was the first publicly hugely famous gay man who was now going to have it. I mean, yes, like Ricky Martin had kids, but he's not as widely beloved and famous in the United States, like regularly on TV every single night, the way Andy is to now be a gay man having a baby. And I know that you had Ava, you know, 10 years prior. So I'm curious, like, because my point is, it wasn't nearly as common as it is nowadays. So did you always want to be a father? Like, how did it happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. The timing's interesting because Andy and I had these conversations many, many years ago. So in my 30s, I had, and my friends reminded me in my 20s and my 30s, you know, as I was in my 40s, you know, you always talked about becoming a dad. And I said, I did. And they said, yeah. And in my mid to late 30s, I started to just kind of look at surrogacy. IVF was not really on the table for gay people. And then all of a sudden, I put it aside, and this conversation happened with my friend, and she said, this is happening. And literally from that conversation, which was a lunch here in Los Angeles at Chin Chin, because I was here visiting for work for the LA Palm, from that conversation, Ava was born 13 months later. So like I just immediately knew, and it was visceral. I called up Andy. I was living between DC and New York for Palm stuff. And I called him up and I said, I have something to tell you. He goes, do not tell me you're going to have a child. You're planning on doing this. We were going to do this together. And I said, I am going to do this now. This is my time to do this. And he understood. And in those 10 years where I became a father, he became Andy Cohen, the beloved Andy Cohen. So we had that decade was 2 different decades for us. And, you know, we talked a lot about it over the last 4 years for Andy because he was concerned about it and his work and his life and being a single man and like how this was going to play itself out. And from my experience, and Ava's his goddaughter, and he watched. And funnily enough, my Ava goes to her doctor every year, and her doctor said to me 3 days ago, because Wyatt now Cooper is in the world and Benjamin Cohen is in the world. She said, you were the trendsetter setter with your friends, and they saw how it was, and here they are starting their family. So it was good. And yeah, it just was timing. It was timing, and I always knew. And I'm just fortunate that we live in a time, and I'm fortunate that marriage equality happened. The Supreme Court is in this crazy conservative weird time. Holding up some of these things. It's scary, but I feel very blessed because my friends who like Barry and Sandy, who are now in their 70s, who were in their 50s when I met, this wasn't on the table for them. They had, this was time. Yeah.
You made reference to, having a teenager in the mix. And so that woman, that person is Billie Lourd, who is the daughter of Bryan and Carrie Fisher.
Yes.
Which is a whole wild story in itself. Basically, your husband were they married, he and Carrie Fisher?
They were not married, but, they were together and, yes, but they never legally got married.
And I remember in the Carrie Fisher documentary, that HBO doc, Bright Lights,
yes.
It was like Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds. At one point, she's like sort of like demonstrating to like to the document or to the director, like just how sort of like chaotic and like almost like soap opera like her whole family history is, and she literally draws on a diagram like all the people in her family who have dated and her friends, and there's like Bryan Lourd, like your husband, because like he's the father of her daughter. So
it's crazy.
So like Carrie Fisher must have, I assume that they remained very close.
Yes, like any relationship, there were complexities to it. Carrie was truly an amazing person, and I knew going in, or I didn't know, but my gut said, I'd never been in a relationship with anyone who had a kid. So all of a sudden I realized one day when I was looking at them, like, I'm in a relationship with two people here, and it's probably more important that my relationship with my or soon to be or one day stepdaughter is important. It's very, because if that doesn't work, nothing will work, and for anybody who's in a relationship with someone who has divorced, who has kids, you need to know that. And I just knew how to be respectful of their family unit and not only enter it that I knew we were bringing a baby into it. And my relationship with Carrie was wonderful. She was one of the smartest people and most complicated and great people. And she said to Ava one day, which was fantastic. Ava must have been 3. She's like, I'm Princess Leia, and you don't know this now. That's really, really cool. One day you're going to know that's
it's
really
very
cool.
important, like for real.
Right, and it worked. I will have to say it really worked. And of course, it's a tragedy that Carrie passed away, and it was a huge loss for our family and certainly for Billy. And and we used to call ourselves, or I still do, the Royal Tannenbaums, because it's just like, I'm like, hey, like, this is your family. It's insane.
It's so good. Jesus, like what, like a rich family history, and it's incredible. Like your daughter's very lucky that, she's growing up into like she's growing up with such like a fulfilling cultural universe surrounding her. And interesting people.
Yes, and you could see that about her. She had some incredible smart people. So her time with Carrie, and she'd be with Carrie and Billy and Debbie and or Bryan and us and a lot of adults and interesting people. And Bryan is interested in so many things, and I think she's very blessed from that standpoint to be not your average 12-year-old. And it was, I went from this gay guy running around New York in my 30s, like, woohoo! We opened Palm West in 1999 in the Theater District. It was nutso, and that's where we were all, like, Andy and I, through that, I became friends with Joe Mantello in the early 90s, with Sarah Jessica Parker, with Natasha Richardson, with John Hickey. Like, we had fun. We had, like, all my friends were show folk. The fact, I guess I am show folk adjacent, but, it was really an incredible time that I think, unfortunately, we're not going to see the likes of for a long time again. I think.
Why do you say that?
I say that because I think the theater was different then. I think the city was different then. So then that was all pre 9/11. So then you have life, as we call it, post and pre 9/11. So then, post 9/11, we settled in, but it was different and good. And then we have this, and I think now we have Trump, and then we're going to hopefully have post-Trump, and we're going to have post-COVID, and we're going to have a city that is, I was in the city last week, and because I've been in LA, and in LA you have all that space. In the city now, you put your mask on when you're going into the elevator, and you don't take that off until you come back home. And the city is, it's dark. It's shut down. It's going to be shut down for a while, and all the cogs in the wheel that make New York spectacular, and I think it's the most spectacular place in the world, and I still think it is, and it will be a shining light again. It's going to be what the world was before, and I don't know, your generation stuff, there are things that are just going to, I think, be different.
Yeah. And
I don't mean to be somber about it, because different, it's hard right now, and everyone needs to stay healthy, but new opportunities come, and a new renaissance comes. And yet again, I also feel one of the things that was a killer in New York was the disparity in income. And I hope that one of the things that shifts is it all sort of comes back into some sort of line where you can have a middle class that lives in New York City, that young artists can live in New York City, that young people can live in New York City, that you don't have to, make $1 gazillion and be a douchebag on Wall Street to live in New York City.
Yeah. Speaking of LA, did you know Lisa Vanderpump from the restaurant industry at all?
No, I met Lisa through Andy. I met Lisa Rinna through Andy, Kyle through Andy. I had just a real connection with Rinna, a nice, really lovely connection with Richard, a great connection with Dorinda. Carol Radswell was a very good friend of mine for many years before, she was on it and off it. LVP and I, we sort of circled each other through. And then, of course, we threw that epic baby shower at the Palm in Beverly Hills, which was insane.
Let's talk about the baby shower. So I was trying to think, what could we possibly talk about that hasn't already been covered to death? But I wonder, I want to hear from your perspective. Tell me just the stressors around actually all the different moving parts and the cogs in the wheel to put on that type of event, which was going to have a guest list full of a lot of personalities.
To say the least, right? It's to say the least. When the Atlanta Housewives walked in, it was like the movie stars walked into that room. It was just like they looked beautiful, and it was just... So Kyle Richards really put that thing together. The Palm was the backdrop. Kyle put, event planners in, and she's incredibly talented when it comes to that. Her eye is fantastic. So we created this whole space. The stress level for me was tremendous, and it kind of turned out to be like a 2-part day. So it's like the arrivals, and people were sort of gentrified. It was one big long table, and people were sort of sitting wherever. There was a little bit of a quadrant for Andy, in his main seat, and then interesting how what women, were kind of sitting near him. I would say was a lot of Beverly Hills and some New York, and then as you went, no, actually, I think Beverly Hills was farther down. And then lunch happened, and it was all really nice.
Civilized.
Toast.
Yeah.
Civilized. And I was like, okay. But I, as a restaurateur who's ran many rooms at the Palm and many events, I just was, I can never fully relax because it was my backdrop. Then it got 2 or 3 hours in. I'm like, okay, well, this is pretty mellow. And for whatever reason, the booze kicked in. And then the energy started to go up, and I was like, oh shit. And then Rinna's saying, everyone get the F on the table, you housewives, you motherfucker, blah, 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 blah. And now you have these women, there was these women on a foretop, a booth, and I'm holding the base of it because just bam, face plant, cosmetic surgery all over the floor, not pretty. And I'm the tables are going like this. You could see I'm just a mess. I can't enjoy it, but everyone's having a great time. And it was just one of those epic afternoon evenings, and we'll go down in history. And but I say everyone brought their best game, and he was so ecstatic, and so it was it was great. And they did a Radio Andy to have a little booth for it. So, which was my idea. I was like, can I do it? He's like, no, you don't know enough about them. And I was like, great, I can't.
Do you actually watch The Housewives?
Not really. I used to watch New York, and I would watch Beverly Hills. And the problem was, and I watched a little bit this year because Kyle and Lisa were on quarantine with Bruce, and Dorinda was on quarantine. I find it so incredibly stressful, and I just get very anxious, and I can't do it. And I love them. Giselle was just on, and Giselle was amazing because Giselle was really talking. She comes from a family of activism. It's right now during Black Lives Matter, so we have to engage. She was on with Anthony, and she was a big fan of, and is a big fan of, Queer Eye. So that was fun. And I Billy put her on recently, so that was fun. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, but yes, I'm not a big fan.
But Bruce, it's ironic because you have been lobbying to be the first gay house husband of Beverly Hills. Isn't this not your dream?
Yes, it was my dream. Well, first of all, when Andy first threw it out there, he was like, "Oh, you should be you." Of course, I would be like, "Oh my God, I just ran into Lisa Vanderpump at Barney's," and he'd be like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I was at shopping." He's like, "This is what you need to do." And Bryan would say, "The minute you do it, it's the minute I divorce you." And I was like, okay, well, season 1, I get a divorce. Okay, that's a good storyline. I'm like, let's do it, Andy. And Andy would be like, da-da-da. But it was not, and it was funny because we talked about it the other day, and I feel like with my nephew, and I go, we're on the other side of that. Like that moment in time, which would have been great for the Palm, maybe great for this, Mugen, which is the company, but never going to happen, Jessica. Never.
Do you think that there should or ever will be a man on the Housewives, like a gay male housewife or house husband?
I'm amazed that hasn't happened. It will be heartbreaking for me. But yes, I think there should be a there should be a gay housewife. It's like not meant to be demeaning to call a man a housewife, but in the fact that men are, gay men can be married, and so many gay people love these shows. So I think it's way past the time because they all have their gay best friends or their gay friends that are coming or going and there's stuff like that. So to actually have, and I know they've tried shows with all gay men to do it, but it doesn't quite have the same thing. But yeah, like I should be pulling up in I don't know what my tagline would be, as I do my turn holding my diamond, but it would be fun.
I think the argument, because there's a lot of conversation around this idea of like a gay man joining the cast. And I think the argument around it is that, no, this is a show. I don't feel either way about it. I think, hell, like anything to liven it up, anything for fresh energy and entertainment. That's all I care about.
Right.
Like I'm very much of the mind, the biggest crime you can commit is to not be entertaining. Like that is my own take.
Right.
But other voices in the fandom, what I've heard is like, no, this is a show about women and you can watch men everywhere else and like it should only be women, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem.
Agree.
I mean, I kind of feel like they're taking it a little bit too seriously. So I understand, okay, this is a show about women, but is it really just a show about women? How many women are like that? You know what I mean? And actually you can argue, and there are people that have problem with how they treat each other and how they act. So, if it's really a comedy, because The Housewives is a comedy. I mean, that's what it is. It's a TV show that's a comedy. And why not throw into the mix a Real Housewife of Beverly Hills and have the first, gay relationship be, and it's a housewife. And I mean, I get it. And I guess it bleeds into sort of, it's a man's world and Me Too and a white man's world and all that stuff. And it gets so complicated. But at the end of the day, like you, I feel like let's just have some fun. And it's not meant to be taken so seriously.
Yeah. Just like a final note about the Housewives. I remember a few years ago, gosh, I don't know how, maybe it was like 4 or 5 years ago. I remember there were paparazzi photos of Bethany on the beach in Miami, and it said Bethany spotted with with like a hot, hunky mystery man, and it was you.
I know, I was in good shape. I looked at that picture. I was really like jacked, and it was me. That's what happens. It's like I'm the hot mystery man. Then it's like, oh, gay. husband of, and immediately gets not. But yeah, she was there, I was there, we were walking on the beach, and she was very funny. So we're walking down from my hotel to her house. She was staying at the Soho House, and as we're walking, she can spot the paparazzi. So she goes to me, she turns around, okay, she's like, are you ready? Okay, like, watch this, okay. And so as we go and we turn around, it's like, bam, you know, click, 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 click. Like, she's a professional. Like, she's the OG. Like, she's
Truly.
the queen of, she really is the queen of the franchise. And yes, I was the hot one. And yet again, Bryan Lourd was like, really? Do you have to? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Like, this is fun, you know?
Are you friendly with Bethany? Like, have you like seen her at all lately?
I haven't seen her. We did recently text. She texted me in regard to something palm related, and I said we weren't involved in it anymore. And I said I'll be out in East Hampton in July. Maybe we'll have a glass of rosé. I'll come over. We'll do some social distancing. So she was like, that would be great. So maybe in the next like 2 or 3 weeks, we'll hopefully connect.
Cute.
I don't know.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce, I don't want to make you late for your pizza with Andy tonight.
Pizza with Andy. Yes. Thank you. This is a joy.
I love you. I could
I love you
I could
too.
talk to you all night. I love you. Because I know that there are so many more stories in you.
I was just about to say that. There's really a lot of good, juicy ones in there. We're just skimming the surface, and we might need like a part 2, part 3 at some point.
I love it. Tell everybody, like, where can everybody follow you? Everybody, just everything about Sirius.
Yes. So, and first of all, I want to know every way how to, get the word out that I was on your show today, because this is fantastic. Really simple. My Instagram is Bruce Bozzi. I'm on Sirius Radio Andy every Friday. Quarantine with Bruce. 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Western. I'm launching Mugen. You'll know about that in about 3 months. It's great drink. And
Do you have a favorite episode that you've done that you're always like, you guys got to listen to this one?
Yeah, I love my episode with Fran Lebowitz, who is a quintessential New Yorker. We literally did it for an hour and then sat together for 3 hours to talk. So Fran really, for me, was just amazing. I loved also speaking with Gayle King and Nora O'Donnell, because of just, it was taking me out of sort of the pop culture thing and getting into my mind, the minds. I love doing, Anderson and Kelly Ripa, Anderson Cooper separately were great. And, it's fun. And it's kind of, it's a little jarring when you're doing something you don't really know well, because it's like, okay, how am I going to do this? But I'd say those are my favorites.
Bruce, you're so fun. I love you. You'll have to come back. There's so much more I want to talk to you about. I'm pretty sure I can get 10 more Madonna stories out of you.
You really can. You definitely can get. They're there. I'll let you know. They're there.
Guys, you can follow me, Jess XNYC. Follow the show account, Hot Takes Deep Dives. Would love a review if you want to leave one on iTunes. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.